Hey guys, Tim here, Big Dog Forge. Welcome back to the shop. You notice lately that I haven't been putting out a whole bunch of videos. I've been busy with a project for a friend of mine. He belongs to a church that puts up a lot of really big Christmas trees every year. And they're 20-foot tall trees, 25-foot tall trees. And he asked me if I could build them some very large Christmas tree stands. I told him I'd give it a shot. And you guys, if you follow the channel, you saw the prototype video of that. Well, they ordered 8 of them total. So they had the prototype, I had to make 7 more, and I made 1 extra for myself. So there were some challenges to overcome in production of these things in my little shop. So I put a video together for those folks so they could see how it was done. I'm going to go ahead and put it up here. And a lot of fabrication, a little bit of blacksmithing in it, but if you're into that, I hope you enjoy the video. Stick with me, guys. It should be fun. Thanks. Alrighty, guys. We've got an old Lazy Susan that we picked up at a yard sale somewhere. We're going to hot glue this thing down to the middle of the bench. Need a little turntable for these propane tanks. The propane tanks are going to be the sort of the bucket or the can that the tree sits in. And they're good weldable steel. They're flexible. They have to take a lot of expansion and contraction, being propane bottles, and they're watertight, all that good stuff. And I got a fairly good deal on them. I picked up a bunch of them, and they didn't have any valves in the top, so I didn't have to worry about taking that apart. And rather than these things ending up in recycle somewhere or landfill, figured I would use them for this. So we're going to put ourselves a little guide here. Weld it right to the table for our plasma cutter. It was suggested that perhaps I should use like a Schedule 40 pipe and cut it to length and weld a bottom on it. That way I could drill and tap and weld to it, do all the things I need to do to it without all the work that has to go into these propane bottles. I would much rather recycle. Makes it a little more interesting and a little more cost effective. But this was a hurry up and get it done real quick kind of a project, and there was no Schedule 40 pipe to be found anywhere without ordering it in. And it's pretty expensive to order in a length. And there was a minimum of 20 foot of that stuff, and I didn't need that much anyway. So this is going to work out just fine for what we need to do. I'm going to knock these rings off the bottom of these things. And there's a little bit of prep work, like I said, to get the propane tanks to the point where we can actually use them for this project. But I did discover that they have some unique properties to them. I'll show you here in a second. Pretty. Okay, so this is a little jig we made for the press, and it's going to make our rings for the top. We're going to put some 1/4 inch thick by 2 inch wide bands around the top of those propane tanks, so that we can put some nuts and bolts for centering and holding the Christmas tree. So I did not have a ring roller. Couldn't find anybody to roll these things into rings, so we're going to make sort of a clamshell thing. We're going to do 2 halves and put them around the top and weld them together on the can. And this is going to work out pretty well. Now, it wasn't quite as tight as I wanted them to be on the can, so I took a little piece of 1 inch round stock, and it helped bring those in just a little bit. And then one last hit with a press, and it set them perfectly. And that worked out really, really well. And this had a real, I don't know, I gotta be honest, had a real sense of satisfaction to it. Usually when you make these jigs and you sort of cobble them together like that, they don't work out real well, but that one actually did. So we'll snap 2 halves on these cans, and I made them a little bit long so they would overlap. You match one end, and then the other end we'll cut one side off so it'll wrap the tanks perfectly. And that worked out really, really well. I was very happy about that. It saved some time. There was a little bit of time in welding and that kind of thing, but in this short time frame that I had to build these things, this was the best solution. It worked out well. I was able to cut these things to length, and it ended up being a great solution. So I'm going to clean up the end of these things, get them ready for welding. I did a lot of grinding on this belt sander during this project, and I used one belt and it held up really well. I was really surprised, but it did good. Alright, so we're going to put these 2 halves together, and we're going to leave a gap on one side and we weld them together so they'll be a little bit bigger than the can. We'll be able to slide them over and then put clamps all around to pull them down to form around the can. So that's the plan anyway. We'll see how this works out. And that bar is a 3.5 inch wide by inch thick chunk of steel that I'm just using to hold everything flat on the bench while I get the welds in there. And weld them on the outside and the inside, and then grind the inside welds smooth. And we're not going to remove too many welds from these things. The guy that wanted them said, leave them industrial looking, leave them, just kind of rough. They're going to be covered up with tree skirts and all that other stuff anyway, so didn't have to do a whole bunch of cleanup on the welding. Alright, we're going to put these bands around the top of these tanks. So we got to clean off. Some of them were painted and some of them were powder coated. Some of them cleaned up a little easier than others, but not too bad. So like I said, we put clamps all around and we welded our second seam. And on the inside we put 2-inch welds all the way around, about every 3 or 4 inches apart. And then hammered out the inside lip so it set nice and tight against that outer band. And then we went for it and ended up full welding these things all the way around the inside. Just for strength, there's going to be a lot of pressure put on that band all the way around, and I didn't want those welds to be stressed. So, all right, we got to bend up some rings here. So we're going to heat this up. This is 5/8 inch round, and we're bending them around a 5 1/4 inch piece of pipe. And these are going to be the rings that will sit under the tanks to give them a base to sit on. And this actually went pretty easily as well. The entire project was just sort of I don't know, there were not too many problems with it. And the time I had to get it done was a very short period of time, and there was a lot to do, a lot of fabrication, a lot of pieces to make, and they all seemed to just come together. It was just, I don't know, pretty neat. It was a good feeling to know that you plan something out and have very few issues along the way. Sometimes it works. Let me close up these rings, and what we'll do is we'll clean these guys up and we'll weld that joint together, make them a solid ring, and prepare them to weld to the rest of the base before we put them on the tank. So this ring at the bottom of these tanks is going to be sort of a central point for the base to expand from. We're going to set up a jig on the welding table with some magnets and that sort of thing to hold everything into place, so all of these will come out pretty much the same. There we go. All right, now we're going to build a little spike that goes in the middle of the can at the bottom. And when I made the prototype, I didn't show this part, and everybody was concerned that I didn't put a spike at the bottom to hold the tree centered. Well, it was there. I just didn't show it in the last video, but Scrappy the power hammer made pretty short work of these spikes, and then I finished them off by hand at the anvil. And this little angular jig that I've got there I use for making punches and things like that, and it worked out really well for these. So these are 1/2 inch square, 2 inch long after they're drawn out. And like I said, I just cleaned them up on the anvil to make them look nice and uniform and that kind of thing. So, but the challenge was, how do you weld this into the bottom of a round bottom vessel and make sure it's standing straight up and it's equal from all sides? So as I'm grinding the bottoms and putting a little bevel on them, preparing to weld them to the inside bottom of these cans, I kind of formulated a little plan. We'll see how it works here. Okay, so the plan here is I took 2 pieces of 1/4 inch round, and I welded them together in a cross shape. I drilled a hole at that intersection for the point of the spike, and the little cross section holds it perfectly in the middle, and in the base you just stand it up straight and get a couple of tack welds on it, and I full welded those all the way around, and they seem to come out pretty near perfect. So that solution seemed to work out really well as well. There we go. Okie doke. So we welded up another one because we need to drill 4 holes in the outer band through to the inside to hold our centering bolts. So this one sits on top, and we just measure center on both cross legs. That'll give us a chalk mark, and we put our weld joint in between those chalk marks for the bands so it wouldn't interfere. So we need to drill holes in this. Ultimately, those holes need to be 3/4 of an inch, so our 5/8 inch bolts can go through them. Now I could have drilled and tapped these bands, but it's just easier to weld nuts on the inside. They're already drilled and tapped. Like I said, I had very little time to get this done, and I wanted to make sure that I had them done in time. So this was my best and easiest solution. And then we jump up to our 3/4 inch bit. And this little wooden knee that I built to hold these cans worked out really, really well. It let me clamp it down. I didn't have to hold on to the thing. Or made a perfect little table. And it's just a couple of 2x4s. And the regular drill press table is set down on the back side of the cross piece there to hold it in place. Pretty. Alright, so we got to put the bolts in. So I took this piece of plastic and put it on the milling machine and drill these holes in it. So it'll keep all of these bolts in line in cross sections, so they'll all be aimed at each other exactly. So we'll get some nuts on these guys. You'll see how this works in a second. There we go. We tighten the nuts down to the outside. And I didn't over tighten those so they were pressing against the plastic. I let the plastic hold them in place, and the nuts were just up against the outside ring. I get those welded into place. And it worked out really well. There you go. Alright, we need to clean up the bottom so we can weld the bases to these cans. So we went ahead and ground off most of the paint and sanded everything down, the bottoms and the sides, so that they would be ready for paint later on. We're going to paint these black, and we're going to leave the majority of the powder coat on there. We just roughed it up with sander. That worked out well. So these are our rings. They're made out of 3/4 inch rebar, and I had these rolled up at a local rebar outfit that does reinforcement for concrete. And of course they just overlap the ring. I told them to make them 36 inches, and they were a little over that, but that's okay. We'll cut these down, and our jig will be made so that we can compress them inside the jig and keep a standard size. First, we need to relax these things because they have a little bit of a warp here and there, and you can see where that one comes together. It's not perfectly round. So I had a couple of flat spots here and there. Not too big a problem, really. It's not going to hurt anything as long as they sit flat. I just really wanted them round all the way around. So using a stick welder on this stuff just to complete these rings. And I think I was using some 6011 rod on that. So we'll heat these up in sections, about every foot or so. And what it'll do is it'll help relax this ring so it'll sit nice and flat on the welding table. So when we get it all welded up, it'll be sitting flat on the floor. I won't have any issues with it wanting to teeter or move around. And this was a pretty good solution too. It worked out really well. It took a couple of minutes to get all 8 of them done, but it was well worth the time. Okay, so here's our jig to make the bases of these things, and you can see how I'm pressing that down in between 2 stops, and that's keeping our 36 inches across in both directions. We've got our ring in the middle that we made. It's around a piece of that pipe that I bent them around. And then our spokes are 14 1/4 inches long that reach out, and the magnets hold those spokes up against 2 welded stops that are welded to the table all the way around. And it's just a matter of welding them up. And that worked out as well. So we got all 8 of those welded up. And now we've got to get them on these cans, but they have to be straight and level. So my solution here is I cut 4 1/4-inch round rods, exactly 12 inches long. And that should be just about the center of those 5/8-inch spokes on all of these, because they are all built to the same, specification. So if I level that out so that those rods are the center of those spokes all the way around and tack it on there, it should be nice and level. We'll see how that works out. The prototype I did, I simply used a tape measure and went around all 4 spokes, but it seemed like it took, an hour to get them all even. This worked out really well. It took just a few seconds. I'd tip it over to the edge, put 4 welds, one in between each set of spokes. I've got my fingers at the bottom there, lining them up on a couple of chalk marks to make sure that those bolt holes are between the spokes, because there's some reinforcements that are going to go from the spokes up to the band, and I didn't want them to be anywhere near where the bolts went in. We just cleaned off the excess scale and the welds that we had on the base, and give preparation to tack on the supports, the diagonal supports. And I found if I tacked the bottom and then I pressed down a little on the rod, it would push down slightly on the base and ensure that it was making contact with the bench, and it ended up keeping them really stable. So the welding sequence that you're seeing here is literally me welding just one of these stands. And it's a little snippet of each weld. So in the end, they all had quite a few welds on them, and they took a little bit of time, but like I said, they were well worth it. Okay, here's our bolts. We're going to put some T-handles on them. 4.5 inch long, 1/2 inch round, mild steel. And we ground all the galvanization off the top of these bolts. And these will be used to tighten down the centering bolts, obviously, for the tree, and secure it in place. We get the heads of these painted up. They can be drying while we're doing other stuff. So we went about painting these things, and I had a big fan, about a big 3-foot industrial fan, to blow air through the shop while I was doing this. And this was in the morning. It was a little bit cold, So the paint wasn't going on super well, but it did eventually. It was fine. Had the forge going in the background, trying to keep some heat, and the fan going, sucking all the heat out. So, but it all worked out. All right, so out of sheer laziness, I needed to build a tool because I've got 34 of these 6-inch bolts to screw into these things, and I'm not going to do it by hand. So we're going to build a little tool to do this for us, make it a little quicker and easier. And it gave me a chance to do a little hammer work on the anvil, a little forging, which is nice. I needed a break from all the welding and fabrication. And we'll cut this thing off on our little cut-off Hardy, little Brian Brazil style. I actually like that thing. I didn't think I would when I built it, but it's pretty handy. All right, there we go. Ground the scale off, ground the legs up even, and we're going to weld a stem on this thing. And this is all made out of 1/2-inch mild steel. Kind of a weird tuning fork or something. All right, so this thing in conjunction with our drill, there we go. I get these things put in pretty quick. I won't just be standing around screwing around all day. There we go. And right down to the end on these things. We get these bolts put in, get them into the van, get them delivered, and my buddy will be happy. Now I'll get some pictures of these things at the church. There you go. And they do have an 8th one, but it's in another part of the church. So there you go, guys. Thanks for hanging out and watching this one. Appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed it. And Merry Christmas to you. Thanks, guys. Okay, guys, there you go. So they're very happy. They really like them, and they're going to work out well for them. I was able to deliver them, and well, you saw them there in the video. It was a little bit of work, but it was a lot of fun, and it was well worth it. It's always good to spread the Christmas cheer kind of thing, right? So anyway, guys, we'll get back to some regular videos here. And I got some knives to make. I got some other things to catch up on. And we got some new equipment in the shop that's going to be kind of fun to play with. So we'll get you guys caught up. We'll put out a couple of videos here real soon. And appreciate your patience. Thanks, guys. All right. That's it. Take care. Be safe. We'll see you soon. Bye now.